Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into some really thought-provoking stuff today. We've all been following, I think, with fascination, this like rapid progress of AI, especially with, these large language models that everyone's talking about, tools like ChatGPT.
Yeah, it seems like every day there's something new.
Right. But it also kind of makes you wonder, like, where do we go from here?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
can they really just keep getting smarter by getting bigger?
Yeah.
Like, is that the only path?
That's the question, right? A lot of people are asking that. I mean, we have seen such amazing progress. You mentioned ChatGPT, but there's also things like GPT-3, PaLM, and it's tempting to think just make them bigger and they'll solve everything.
Yeah, just throw more data at it.
Exactly. But as this AI researcher, Mezit Falat, argues in this article we're looking at, it might not be that simple. He uses this really intriguing analogy comparing the path of AI to the evolution of human intelligence.
Ooh, okay. I'm already interested. Tell me more about this analogy.
Well, he starts with this image, actually, that was shown at a big AI conference by Ilya Sutskever. It's a chart. You see this chart plotting brain size against body size in mammals.
Makes sense, right? Like bigger animal, bigger brain.
Exactly. Seems pretty straightforward, but here's the thing. Hominids. That's us. We totally broke away from that trend.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, our brains developed MUCH larger than you would expect for our size, and that's when things really took off for humankind. I mean, in terms of cognitive ability.
So it wasn't just about size. There was something else going on with like how our brains develop.
Exactly. And that's the parallel Fellet draws with AI. You see, we've been relying on this idea called scaling laws in AI. Basically, bigger model, more data, better performance.
Bigger is better, so to speak.
Yeah, it's worked really well so far. But what if, like with human evolution, we're hitting a limit on what sheer size can achieve?
It's funny because you hear about these like massive AI models with billions of parameters, but they still really struggle with certain tasks. It's almost like whales, right? They have huge brains, but they aren't writing symphonies.
That's a great point. And it really highlights what Fila is saying. The hominid advantage, it wasn't just Czech's bigger brains, it was how they were wired and used. We developed language, symbolic thought, complex social structures, and, crucially, we learned to pass knowledge down through generations. We call that cumulative culture building on what came before.
So it's not just about raw processing power. It's about how we use that power, how we learn, how we interact with the world and each other. Makes you realize how much we take for granted as humans.
Oh, absolutely. And that's exactly what Felat suggests AI needs. We can't just keep scaling up these models trained on static data. We need to figure out how to give them the ability to learn and adapt more dynamically, more like WE do.
Okay, so let's dig into that. What are the limitations of how most of these large language models are trained right now?
Well, think about it this way. Most LLMs today, they're basically just fed, like, massive amounts of text data. They're learning to predict the next word in a sequence,
Right.
which is impressive on the surface,
Yeah.
but it also creates some serious limitations.
Like what?
Well, first, there's this lack of grounding. Words are just symbols to these models. Imagine like an LLM trying to write a poem about the joy of eating an apple,
Yeah.
but it's never actually experienced the crunch, the sweetness, the smell,
Yeah.
It's just processing words. It doesn't really have that connection to the real experience.
So even though they can process language, they don't truly understand it the way we do because they lack that real world connection.
Exactly. And then on top of that, there's the problem of static data. They're learning from a fixed snapshot of text, not this like dynamic changing world like we experience. It's like trying to learn about, I don't know, fashion from a 1950s textbook.
You'd be missing out on a lot.
Right. So much has changed. And lastly, they don't develop in stages like humans do. We learn different things at different times, building on what we already know.
It's like cramming a lifetime's worth of learning into a single intense boot camp.
Yeah, exactly. No wonder they have blind spots.
So if just making them bigger isn't enough, then where do we go from here?
Well, Fouts suggests, we should look to nature for inspiration. He argues that by understanding how human intelligence evolved, we can find clues for building more capable AI. And there are some really fascinating ideas here, things like neuroplasticity, sensitive periods, grounded and embodied learning, even cultural transmission between AIs.
Whoa, hold on. That's a lot to unpack. Let's dive into some of these, shall we?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's start with neuroplasticity and sensitive periods. A child's brain, it doesn't develop all at once, right?
Right.
Different parts are more receptive to learning certain things at certain ages. What if we could apply that concept to LLMs? What if they had different stages of learning,
Okay.
focusing on specific skills at optimal times?
It's a fascinating idea. Instead of trying to learn everything at once, focus on mastering one area then another, building on that foundation, just like humans do.
Exactly. And what about grounded and embodied learning? We were talking about this earlier. Humans, we learn by interacting with the world through our senses, through actions. What if LLMs could do the same?
They're right. Imagine training them on text A&D images, or even letting them, control robots to actually experience the physical world.
Wow, that would be amazing. It's
Yeah.
like giving them a body to interact with the world instead of just existing in this abstract space of data.
Yeah, it's one of the most exciting areas of AI research right now.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And then there's this whole other idea, cultural and social transmission. Think about how much we learn from each other, not just from data.
Right.
What if we could train multiple LLMs? Let them communicate, cooperate, maybe even develop their own kind of culture.
Whoa, that's really mind-blowing. It's like
Yeah.
we're talking about creating a whole society of AI.
In a way, yeah. And it could be incredibly powerful, if we can figure out how to incorporate these kinds of biological and cultural insights into AI training. Who knows what we might achieve?
Okay, so we've talked about these limitations of current LLM training and then some potential solutions inspired by human evolution. But how would we actually implement these solutions? What kind of new architectures and training methods would we need?
Well, that's where things get really cutting edge. And, there are a lot of brilliant people working on this right now.
Yeah, I bet.
But just to give you a taste, let's look at a few kind of key ideas. First, there's modular architectures.
Behind chiller architectures.
Instead of one giant neural network, what if LLMs had specialized components for different types of thinking? Kind of like how our brains have different regions for language, vision, motor control.
So it's like breaking down these complex tasks into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Precisely. Imagine an LLM that starts by, mastering language, then it adds visual understanding. Later, it learns to reason about physical objects, and all while constantly updating its knowledge, just like we do. That's the power of these new approaches.
I can see how that would be a game changer.
Yeah.
It's like giving them a more human-like way of learning and processing information. What else is on the horizon?
Well, another really important area is continual learning. Right now, most LLMs, they're kind of frozen after training. They can't really adapt or learn new things on the fly.
Right.
But imagine if they could keep learning throughout their lives, constantly updating their knowledge and skills, just like humans do.
That's fascinating. So instead of being limited to like what they were initially trained on, they could keep evolving and expanding their understanding of the world. It's like
Mhm.
giving them the ability to be lifelong learners.
Exactly. And this ties in nicely with the idea of interactive guidance. Imagine, training LLMs more like we teach children with ongoing feedback and interaction. It could be crucial for making sure these like increasingly powerful AIs remain aligned with human values and goals.
That makes a lot of sense. We wouldn't just hand a child a textbook and say, okay, go learn everything.
Mm.
We guide them, we answer their questions, we help them understand the world. Why wouldn't we do the same for AI?
That's a really good point. And it really highlights the importance of thinking carefully about, how we design these systems and how we train them, because as AI becomes more powerful and integrated into our lives, we need to make sure it's working with us, not against us.
Absolutely. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, we'll continue exploring these ideas, looking at some of the latest research and what it might mean for the future of AI. So stay with us.
It really is fascinating to think about, isn't it? As we create these increasingly powerful AIs, how do we make sure they're, aligned with our values and working collaboratively with us?
It really makes you think about what it means to be human. We were just talking about how we learn and grow, but it's not just about like logic and processing power. There's also our emotional intelligence, our creativity, our sense of morality, all these things that make us WHO we are.
Absolutely. And it's not just about replicating raw processing power. It's about understanding what makes us tick, our motivations, our emotions, our ability to reason and make moral judgments.
And, how all of that interacts with our cultural and social environments.
Hmm.
We're not just like isolated brains in jars. We're products of our cultures, our upbringing, our interactions with others. All those things shape who we are and how we think.
Exactly. And it leads to a big question. How do we even begin to incorporate those kinds of complexities into AI?
It sounds like a pretty daunting challenge. I mean, where do you even start?
Well, it is a challenge, but it's not, insurmountable. There are already some exciting developments happening in this area.
Okay, tell me more. What kind of developments?
One area that's showing a lot of promise is developmental robotics.
I've heard that term before, but could you remind me what it's all about?
Essentially, it's about building robots that learn and develop in a way that's inspired by child development.
Interesting. So instead of just programming a robot to do specific tasks,
Yeah,
we're giving it the ability to learn and adapt on its own,
yeah,
like a child exploring the world.
exactly. And that's where the idea of embodied learning that we discussed earlier really comes into play. These robots aren't just sitting in a lab. They're actively interacting with the physical world, experimenting, making mistakes, learning from those experiences, just like DBUE did as kids.
It's almost like giving them a childhood. I can see how that would be incredibly beneficial for their development.
And what's fascinating is that these robots are starting to show some surprisingly human-like behaviors.
Oh, really? Give me an example. What kinds of behaviors?
Well, researchers have developed robots that can learn to grasp objects, in a way that's very similar to how infants do. They start out clumsy and uncoordinated, but through trial and error, they gradually refine their motor skills.
Wow, that's amazing. To think that they can actually learn these things through experience just by interacting with the world around them. What about language? Can these robots learn to communicate?
That's another area of active research, and we're seeing some really promising results. Some researchers are using techniques from developmental psychology to teach robots language in a way that mirrors how children learn.
So they're not just being programmed with like a vocabulary and grammar rules, they're actually learning language through interaction and experience.
You got it. And what's remarkable is that these robots are showing signs of understanding language that goes beyond just recognizing words. They're
Yeah.
starting to grasp the underlying meaning and intent.
That's incredible. So you're saying that by giving these robots the ability to learn and interact with the world in a more human-like way, they're actually starting to develop some of the same cognitive abilities that WE have. It almost makes you wonder, like, what's the distinction between them simply mimicking human behavior and truly understanding it?
It's a question that gets to the heart of the nature of intelligence itself. And while we don't have all the answers yet, the research is certainly pointing to some very intriguing possibilities.
It definitely raises some philosophical questions.
Yeah.
But let's bring it back to large language models for a second. We were talking about how they're mostly trained on text data, which is, very limited compared to the rich sensory experiences we humans have. How can we bridge that gap? Is there a way to, like, give LLMs a more grounded understanding of the world?
There are definitely ways. One approach that's gaining a lot of traction is multimodal learning.
Multimodal learning. Refresh my memory on what that means again.
Sure. Basically, it means training AIs on multiple types of data, not just text, but also images, videos, audio, even sensory data from the physical world.
Ah, I see. So instead of just learning from words, they're learning from a combination of different inputs.
You got it. And the idea is that by exposing LLMs to this, like richer, more diverse data set, they can develop a more grounded, nuanced understanding of the world.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like giving them all the different pieces of the puzzle rather than just one.
Exactly. And we're already seeing some interesting results. Researchers have developed multimodal models that can generate descriptions of images, translate languages, and even answer questions about videos.
Wow. So they're not just processing language anymore. They're actually starting to understand the relationships between language and other forms of information.
That's right. And that's a huge step forward in creating AI that can interact with the world in a more meaningful way. But it's not JSD about giving AI more data. It's about teaching them to understand human values and norms.
That reminds me of something we talked about earlier, the idea of cultural transmission. How do we go about teaching AIs about those, often unspoken rules that govern human behavior?
It's a tricky question, but one approach being explored is using reinforcement learning from human feedback.
Could you remind me what that is again?
Certainly, it's a way of training AI to align with human preferences. You give the AI a task, and then you provide feedback on how well it performed. Over time, the AI learns to produce outputs that are more likely to be judged favorably by humans.
So it's kind of like giving them a virtual pat on the back when they do something good and a virtual slap on the wrist when they do something, not so good.
That's a simplified way to think about it, but
Yeah.
you get the idea. And this approach has been quite successful in aligning LLMs with human values.
That's good to hear. But it also raises an interesting question, doesn't it? Who gets to decide what's good and what's bad? Who's providing this feedback to the AI?
You've hit on a crucial point. It gets right to the heart of the ethical considerations surrounding AI development.
Because if we're not careful, we could end up creating AI that reflect the biases and prejudices of the people who are training them.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have, diverse teams of people involved in the training process. We need to make sure that the feedback the AI is getting comes from a wide range of perspectives.
That makes sense. And it seems like a continuous process, right? We need to be constantly evaluating and refining the training process to make sure it's not perpetuating harmful stereotypes or biases.
You're absolutely right. It's an ongoing challenge and one that we need to be constantly aware of as we develop these technologies.
So we've talked about all these incredible ways researchers are trying to bridge this gap between human intelligence and AI. But let's zoom out for a minute and think about the big picture. What does all this mean for the future? What kind of world are we creating?
That's the million-dollar question. It's one that I don't think anyone has a definitive answer to. But what I can say is the future of AI is going to be shaped by the choices we make today.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we have a responsibility to develop these technologies thoughtfully and ethically. We need to be mindful of the potential risks, but also be open to the incredible possibilities.
I see what you mean. It's a delicate balance, isn't it? We don't want to stifle innovation, but we also don't want to create something we can't control.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to have open and honest conversations about these issues. We need to involve a wide range of voices, not just AI researchers and engineers, but also ethicists, social scientists, policymakers, and the public at large.
Because ultimately, the future of AI isn't just about technology. It's about humanity.
Well said. It's about finding ways to use these powerful tools to create a better world for everyone.
I love that. All right, well, I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive for today. It's been an incredible conversation, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this incredibly complex and fascinating topic.
It really has been a great discussion, and I agree this is just the beginning. There's so much more to explore.
And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. What qualities do you think are most important for AI to possess in order to truly collaborate with humans?
Share your ideas with us on social media using the hashtag #DeepDiveAI. We're always eager to hear from our listeners and continue this conversation.
And be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more thought-provoking explorations of the most fascinating topics of our time. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Wow, we have covered so much ground today in this deep dive, and it's amazing to think about just how far AI has already come and all the possibilities still ahead. I have to say I'm feeling a bit of a mix of excitement and a little apprehension after everything we've talked about. All these advancements. It really makes you think about what the future holds for all of us.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. It's evolving so quickly. AI, I mean, it's natural to feel both excited and maybe a little cautious, as we figure out what this all means, where it's all going. It's true. And I keep thinking back to that image we were looking at earlier, the brain to body size chart. It's such a powerful reminder that true progress isn't always about just scaling things up.
Yeah.
It takes more than that. Sometimes it requires a totally different approach, a fundamental shift.
Absolutely. It's like how hominids, us broke away from that predictable trend line. It wasn't just about having bigger brains. It was this whole new way of thinking and interacting with the world. And I think that's a really important lesson for AI development, too.
It's funny because when we talk about AI becoming more intelligent, we often just immediately jump to things like logic and processing power, right? Like how fast can it calculate, how much data can it store? But listening to you today, it seems like those aren't the only Y qualities that really matter.
You're right.
In fact, there might be other aspects of human intelligence that are even more crucial to replicate in AI if we want to see real progress.
And Mezet Fella actually talks about this a bit in his article, too. He argues that the future of AI isn't just about, creating machines that can think like humans. It's about creating machines that can actually think with us.
That's a really interesting distinction. So what do you think? What are some of the key qualities that would enable AI to really collaborate with humans in a truly meaningful way?
Well, I think there are many, of course, but if I had to pick one that stands out to me, it would be empathy.
Empathy. Okay, that's interesting. Why empathy specifically?
Because empathy allows us to connect with others on a deeper level. It helps us understand their feelings, their motivations, even their perspective, even when those things are completely different from our own. And it's this understanding that allows us to make moral judgments, ones that take into account the well-being of everyone involved.
I see what you mean. Like, if AI could understand our emotions and perspectives, it would completely change how we interact with those systems.
Think about it. Imagine AI that could not only process information, but also understand the emotional context behind that information. AI that could, like, sense when we're feeling frustrated or confused and respond in a way that's actually helpful and supportive.
It would be amazing, like having a teammate or a partner, really, who gets you, understands you, and is working with you, not just for you.
Exactly. And I think that's ultimately what we should be striving for with AI, a future where humans and machines can collaborate to solve problems together, to create new things, to build a better world, really, for everyone.
It's a beautiful vision, and it's inspiring to think about what all the possibilities could be.
It is inspiring, and it all starts with asking the right questions, exploring different perspectives, being willing to challenge our assumptions. That's what makes these deep dives so valuable, I think.
You're right, exploring these ideas and thinking critically about this future of AI is so essential. So, on that note, I want to thank you for joining me on this fascinating journey. It's been incredible, really. I've learned so much.
It's been a pleasure. I always enjoy these conversations, and I'm constantly learning new things too.
And to our listeners, thank you for diving deep with us today. We hope this has sparked your curiosity and maybe given you some food for thought. And we want to keep the conversation going. So what do you think? What qualities do you think are most important for AI to possess if we really want it to collaborate with us, with humans?
Share your ideas with us. You can find us on social media using the hashtag #DeepDiveAI. We love hearing from you, and we can't wait to, see what you come up with.
And be sure to subscribe to The Deep Dive for more thought-provoking explorations of, well, just about everything. Until next time, everyone, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.